Hello Internet! Before we get to the actual content, a few words. This creation is inspired by the lectures of Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, where he delves into the meaning hidden inside classic fairy tales and explores how the stories we tell ourselves serve as a delivery device for important ideas. The first impulse came out of a comment he made about how Frozen is a terrible movie that Disney made to tell girls that they don't need men. I was well aware then that the movie was indeed praised in certain circles for breaking away from the usual formula where the princesses get into trouble and have to be rescued by princes, and how, for the same reasons, different circles hated it for being too woke. Kind of how there are varying opinions about the persona of Dr. Peterson himself. But having watched that movie, I thought, hang on, is that really what it is about? Sure, the princesses were not saved by a man, but going from that all the way to women don't need men seemed like a stretch and didn't really strike me as the true punchline of the story. That left me with a question. Okay, fine, but if that is not the meaning of the movie, then what is? And so I decided to try and analyze the movie in a fashion similar to Dr. Peterson's lectures and see what meaning I might find there. If for no other reason than to show that sometimes meaning might hide itself in the places where you don't want to look. And with that out of the way, let's talk about Frozen. Frozen opens up with a song. Part of its role is to serve as a foreshadowing for the movie, but interestingly, the song also works incredibly well in the context with what is actually happening during the opening scene. What we have there is a bunch of big, burly, bearded blokes engaged in difficult physical labor in snowy mountains where they are cutting ice. It's not hard to imagine that such job would also involve facing various environmental hazards, like possibly falling into freezing water or being crushed by a heavy block of ice if it slips out in a moment of carelessness. In this context, the song the men sing serves a dual purpose. First, it is a reminder about how winter is a powerful force that doesn't care how strong you are or how many men you have. If it finds you unprepared, it can absolutely defeat you, so it shouldn't be underestimated. And second, it gives a justification for facing that kind of danger. Because why would anyone go out and willingly face that winter if death was all that waited for you there? Well, because it holds something valuable. The song refers to this as the frozen heart worth mining. Therefore, in its essence, it is a song about facing the harshness of primordial chaos that holds the potential for both beauty and danger and extracting something of value. So even if we might get some sense that the song is just foreshadowing some elements of the movie's plot, for these ice cutters, it is also a song about the literal ice that forms the basis of their livelihood. Now, in the next scene, we meet Elsa and Anna, the two princesses who are the main protagonists of the story. The younger Anna entices the older Elsa to play in the middle of the night, and it is here that we learn that Elsa possesses the gift of ice magic. As we learned in the opening song of the movie, the ice magic is tied to the forces of the primordial natural chaos. It is beautiful, playful, but can also be dangerous. In ancient mythology, primordial natural chaos is often depicted as the feminine aspect of existence, much like Tiamat in the Babylonian creation myth. Because of that, Elsa's ice magic could be considered to be a manifestation of the essential feminine power. As to why only Elsa has the ability to use ice magic, but Anna doesn't, that might have something to do with Elsa being the older sister, which also makes her the future queen. As such, her feminine power has a much higher potential impact. This idea echoes in the real world when people discuss female politicians, though they tend to focus on different aspects of femininity depending on what fits their stance on the matter. Now, back to Elsa and Anna. As they are playing around with ice magic, what they also happen to be doing is exploring the boundary between order and chaos. This is where the human mind is the most engaged. Things are mostly safe, but there's just enough chaos to make things interesting. However, when you are testing the boundaries, sometimes you take things a step too far, which is exactly what happens. While they are playing, Anna is struck by Elsa's magic and loses consciousness. That is the danger of the primordial chaos. Sometimes an unexpected event occurs, and if you are not prepared for it, it might harm you or even completely destroy you. In a way, these kinds of events could be considered the way existence itself is testing you and then passing a judgment of sorts. Everything about you is taken into account and determines what kind of new you emerges transformed afterwards. In Anna's case, this exposure to chaos is simply too much for a child to bear, so the parents need to step in, and even they do not have all the answers themselves. They seek help of the trolls, who seem to represent something like the ancient natural wisdom. The conversation with the troll elder has three interesting points. First, he asks if Elsa was born with her powers or cursed with them. The significance of that would be discerning whether the powers represent something like Elsa's potential, or if there is some malicious intent at play, inflicted onto Elsa and through her passed down to Anna. We might see something similar with trauma victims. Not all of them, but some, who end up coping with their trauma by inflicting more trauma onto others. Next, the troll elder makes an important distinction between being hurt in the heart and being hurt in the head, saying something like, the heart never forgets, but the mind can be persuaded. And if you look at the circumstances of Anna's injury, what we might take from that would be that Anna was hurt while engaged in a playful activity. There was no malicious intent involved, so she was only hurt physically. The incident did not scar her emotionally. Therefore, just removing her memories pertaining to her encounter with chaos is enough to restore her consciousness, though it seems to me that this is probably representing the natural tendency of human minds to suppress trauma rather than having their memories erased externally. And finally, the troll elder addresses Elsa, telling her about the great beauty and danger inherent in her powers, and that she needs to learn to control them, and that fear will be her enemy. Unfortunately, this piece of advice misses its mark. Elsa's parents, perhaps out of concern for Anna, take that to mean that Elsa must avoid using her powers, suppress them, and hide them from everyone. And although suppression is a form of control, it does not properly address the underlying problem. The problem, a metaphorical dragon, who is now just a small baby, is merely pushed out of sight, and instead of solving the problem, increasingly more and more effort is expended on pretending the problem does not exist, as the unsolved problem grows bigger and stronger, until the dragon, who was once small and cute, is now enormous with sharp teeth and claws and impossible to contain. All out of fear of confronting the problem, the very fear that the troll elder warned against, and suppressing it instead of facing it and properly integrating the dangerous nature of the primordial chaos within yourself. And all this time, while Elsa is struggling with containing her powers, Anna has to suddenly face isolation from Elsa. Nothing is explained to her. She has no idea why her sister is being so distant. The reasons are unknown to her, And because the unknown is another manifestation of the primordial chaos, and it can be anything and everything all at once, that makes it all the more difficult for Anna to deal with it. In her mind, she has to contend with all the infinite possible reasons, not knowing whether the fault lies with her or if some external factor is at play, and this in turn forms a massive hydra of a problem, all heads striking at once and impossible to defeat. Even when their parents are tragically lost at sea, the two sisters seem unable to reconnect, and in a way, this marks the end of their childhood. With their parental guidance gone, they are left to figure things out for themselves. Fast forward 3 years later, when an important event is about to occur, the coronation day, when Elsa is going to assume her duty as the rightful ruler of the land. While she has been able to suppress her power so far, this was only because all this time she lived in an enclosed, protected space, the metaphorical walled city of order, where things are safe and predictable, with all the chaos kept outside. This changes on the coronation day. The gates will be open for the ceremony so that Elsa can be introduced to the society outside, but this means that the chaos will be allowed to enter the protected zone, which will inevitably shake things up and challenge Elsa, because now she will have to deal both with the chaos within and the chaos without. We can also see how Elsa and Anna react differently in anticipation of this event. Elsa sees it as the looming threat to the status quo that allowed her to keep her powers contained, as a burden of responsibility she will have to bear, and as a moment of judgment when her ability to control chaos, and thus, in a way, her capacity to be a good queen, will be tested, and that is a scary thing to contend with, because such a test might open your eyes and reveal the truth, and the truth could be unpleasant. It could shake your assumptions about the world and where you stand in the hierarchy. It could reveal your failures and deficiencies, and that realization can sometimes propagate up the layers of abstraction, so that you might end up thinking that because you are bad at controlling your powers, that also makes you a bad sister, bad queen, and, ultimately, a bad person altogether. So no wonder Elsa is afraid, but it is also still the very same fear that the troll elder was warning her against all those years ago. Meanwhile, Anna is brimming with excitement because opening the gates presents an opportunity for adventure. The safe enclosure of the castle was also the tyranny of the state that limited her freedom. And not only that, we might also get some sense that Anna is being overly optimistic in her expectations. By growing up in a sheltered environment and having all notions of the dangers that chaos might bring removed from her surroundings, she remains somewhat naive and thus vulnerable. And sure enough, very soon she meets the handsome Prince Hans. We can immediately see the sparks of romantic interest. And when they meet in the coronation ball, they sing a duet together, narratively setting them up as a future couple. And in the spur of the moment, they even decide to get married. So, Anna and Hans approach Elsa to seek her blessing. But Elsa declines. And though she might be partly motivated by her own circumstances, wanting to avoid any future disruptions that might lead to her losing control over her powers, she also quite rightly points out to Anna that she only just met Hans, so marrying him is not a good idea, especially since Anna might be overestimating her knowledge of what true love actually is. That challenges Anna's worldview, so she engages in a little bit of willful blindness, and rather than confronting the possibility that she might be wrong, she dismisses what Elsa has said to be just another expression of the tyranny of the state and keeps pressing her for explanations. It is at this moment that Elsa's self-control finally snaps. She lashes out with her magic, forming a barrier of icy spikes, revealing the destructive potential of the power of primordial chaos she was holding back all this time. Now the cat's out of the bag, and Elsa has a choice. Face the consequences and assume responsibility, or to reject that burden and run away. And much like Simba in The Lion King, when Scar tells him how he will be blamed for Mufasa's death, she chooses the latter. Interestingly, the similarities with The Lion King do not end there. After leaving the confines of the safe city, Elsa finds a secluded place, and the famous song she sings at the time is all about leaving all her burdens of expectations and responsibility behind, about feeling liberated, shedding the mask, and transforming into her true self. This is very much like the Hakuna Matata song in A Lion King, where Simba lets go of the past trauma and grows into a big, strong lion. While a very necessary developmental step, it is not without its issues. The phase is characterized by self-indulgence rather than proper integration, and giving up responsibility carries consequences. We can see that in Lion King, where while Simba is having fun eating bugs in his little paradise, his domain suffers because it is being usurped by a tyrant. In Frozen, the rightful ruler of the land is likewise absent, and as a result, an eternal winter threatens to consume the kingdom. This concept of the ruler and the land being tied together is quite old. We can also see it in the story of the Fisher King from Arthurian legends. In the following stage of the movie, we return back to Anna, who is traveling through the wilderness up the mountain to bring her sister back. This is reminiscent of the theme of descending down to the underworld to bring back something of value, just like in the Egyptian myth of Horus and Osiris, the Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, the biblical story of Jonah and the whale, or the story of Pinocchio, likewise swallowed by the very same whale that swallowed his father. By turning the theme of descent into a theme of ascending a mountain, this also introduces the element of hierarchy of values, where the most important thing lies at the top. For Anna, this is also her guiding principle, the star that she is oriented towards. There are several notable moments on Anna's journey. First, we see that she's clearly not all that well prepared for it. Her horse runs away, she falls into ice-cold water, and really gets a first taste of the harshness of winter. Luckily, she happens upon a trading post. In some ways, this might be similar to the hobbits in Lord of the Rings, encountering Tom Bombadil, a meeting that in some sense marks the true threshold between the known and the unknown. The trader there seems like a nice fellow, but when Christoph, who we meet again here at this location, shows up and insults him, he doesn't let it slide and throws Christoph out, thus showing that he also has the capacity for being dangerous, which is actually quite appropriate for someone who lives right on the edge of order and chaos. Anna then enlists the help of Christoph, and they set out together. And while the two are chatting, Anna is once again confronted with the notion that getting engaged with Hans on the first day of meeting him might have been a little premature, this time when Christoph questions her on the subject. Anna once again brushes it off. Here's that willful blindness again. But this time, it really should have given her a pause. Sure, when your beliefs are challenged once, it might just be an anomaly. But when it happens again, it is worth considering that maybe you have some blind spots in your worldview. After all, there is only one of you and a lot more people around you, and the more of them are pointing out some fault in your thinking, the greater the likelihood that you are the one operating under false assumptions. However, Anna doesn't really get a chance to think about it much more because they get beset by wolves, a harsh reminder that they are now in the realm of the natural chaos. And when your survival is at stake, the basic needs take priority. They do manage to escape the wolves by jumping across a ravine, and on the other side, they encounter a little pocket of forest where the branches are all covered in sparkling ice, which is like the other side of the natural chaos. It's not just the freezing cold and wolves, but also the beautiful sights. They are not separate, they are both one entity that can manifest itself as either. And maybe the meaning of that is something like, if you survive the walls, you get to see the pretty glade on the other side of the ravine. It is there that they encounter Olaf the snowman. Now, Olaf, while mostly a comic relief character, is also something like a representation of both Anna's and Elsa's childlike innocence and naivety. We can see that in his desire to experience summer. He is imagining all the nice summertime things and activities while being seemingly oblivious to the dangers it would pose to him. Now, interestingly, Anna and Christoph have very different reactions when it comes to that. While Christoph thinks it would be best to tell Olaf that the snowman in summer would melt, Anna instead wants to protect Olaf's dream. This is the balancing act that all parents have to deal with, one way or the other. On one hand, you want to protect your child, and ideally, you want your child to be motivated by some goal or dream, to have some sort of direction so that they might develop into a functioning adult. But on the other hand, if you are overprotective, then your child remains naive and unprepared for the real world, and at some point, that child's fantasy will clash with the reality. And if that child is a snowman and the reality is the summer, then that won't end well for the child. There is a hint of that in the following scene. Olaf offers to guide Anna and Christoph to Elsa, so now they are effectively being guided by the spirit of childlike innocence and naivety. And we get to see what that might bring when they are traversing an area with these sharp horizontal icicles. Christoph narrowly avoids having his eye poked out, but Olaf isn't looking where he's going at all and ends up full-on impaled. Of course, this is partly due to his nature as a snowman, but even in real life, when you are this oblivious to danger, you might get hurt and not even realize it. Finally, the trio arrives at the peak of the mountain when they find the magnificent ice castle that Elsa has built for herself. In an interesting overlap of themes, the blue ice, Elsa's blue dress, and the snowflake patterns, combined with the area that this is something like the most important thing at the top of the hierarchy of values, they all echo the blue fairy theme from Pinocchio and the idea that when you wish upon a star, your dreams will come true, the star here being the highest ideal, and that if you orient yourself towards it, it will set you on the path to success. It is here that Anna and Elsa finally meet again. During that interaction, Anna is relieved because she finally finds out that all this time, Elsa was just avoiding her out of concern for her safety. That makes her all the more motivated to try and save her sister. But Elsa doesn't want that. She is too worried that by getting close, she might end up hurting Anna again. And so she refuses Anna's help, despite realizing that she is unable to solve the issue on her own, even though this might very well be one of these cases where the solution is in the place where you want to look the least. However, avoiding the problem is not going to work anymore. Anna reveals to Elsa that in her absence, the kingdom is suffering from sudden winter. This is very upsetting for Elsa because all this time she thought that as long as she keeps her distance, everything will be fine, but this confrontation with reality shatters that mode of being. That sends her on a bit of a downward spiral, from the realization that she has been wrong in her assumptions, to blaming herself for making things worse, to being consumed by fear so much that in her desperation, she lashes out with her power and ends up actually hurting Anna, which is exactly what she was trying to avoid in the first place. Now this time, Elsa's power struck Anna in her heart, and we know from earlier that this is much worse than being struck in the head. As to why, we have to look at the circumstances that were quite different from the first time that Anna got hurt. Back then, it was mid-play. This time, Anna was hurt while reaching out to her sister, trying to help her, and Elsa rejecting that and lashing out at her didn't hurt Anna just physically, but also emotionally, aligning the physical reality of a bolt of ice magic striking her in the chest with the symbolism of hurting her feelings. Afterwards, Anna and Kristoff and Olaf are forced to retreat by a giant snow monster that Elsa conjures to isolate herself. Anna's condition is getting worse, so Kristoff decides to seek the help of the trolls. Now, this whole encounter is quite interesting because it would be quite easy to dismiss it as a simple comic relief segment. The trolls act goofy, trying to push Anna and Kristoff into marrying each other with a little singing performance, which of course is quite awkward for both of them, and the audience might get a laugh out of it. But the song's contents actually hint at something quite important. Everyone is a bit of a fixer-upper. It's not very likely that you will find a romantic partner that will be perfect. And here's a fun fact: even if you did, the statistical probability that you yourself have some flaws is much higher than that you are flawless. So that perfect person might look at you and think, why should I have anything to do with this flawed creature? Of course, this doesn't mean that you should just hook up with the first person available. They should still at least in some way reflect your values so that you won't end up betraying those values and yourself. Plus, it would also be a terrible thing to regard your partner as not who I wanted, but who I could get. Just know that you might have to end up making a choice in how close to your ideal that person has to be in order for you to consider pursuing them, and what degree of flaws you would be willing to accept as something that your potential partner might be likely to improve at with a little bit of help. Because that is one of the big advantages of having a partner in the first place. You might be blind, willfully or otherwise, to your own flaws, maybe because their consequences do not manifest themselves to you directly in a way that you would notice. But when you get a partner, they might start pointing out things about you, both good and bad, and together you might start working out how to elevate each other by supporting yourselves in the good and trying to fix the bad. And this is not limited to romantic relationships either. The song puts it into words quite well. Father, sister, brother, we need each other to raise us up and round us out. And then it goes on to essentially suggest that this notion of spending effort in order to help a person become a better version of themselves is roughly equivalent to the meaning of true love, which is a really good way of thinking about it. Speaking of true love, the elder troll finally shows up and tells Anna that her life is in danger and that only an act of true love will thaw the ice in her heart. Without it, she would turn to solid ice forever. And what happens is that everyone immediately jumps to the conclusion that this act of true love means a true love's kiss. So they ride off to seek out Hans, because Anna is still convinced that he is her true love, and so he will save her. However, what ends up happening instead is quite unexpected. Just when it looks like Hans is about to kiss Anna, he instead reveals that he doesn't love her and that in fact he's been planning to take over the kingdom all along. He locks her up, expecting her to die, and goes off scheming to get rid of Elsa and claim the throne for himself. Now, the narrative execution of this betrayal is one thing. Many people criticize it for the lack of build-up and absence of foreshadowing, although there are also some who try to point out some moments in the early story that might possibly be considered as such with the right context. Still, fact remains that to many people, myself included, it came as a total surprise. And what happened next, in my case at least, is a textbook example of what happens when you are confronted with a sudden unexpected betrayal. I went back to review the scenes with Hans, thinking that maybe I have missed something. I thought the movie was one thing, that I knew what happened and what was going to happen, but that was suddenly not the case, and so in some sense, I was suddenly watching a completely different movie, and I needed to make sense of where it went wrong. Same thing happens when you are betrayed personally. You start doubting everything, realizing that the person who betrayed you is not the person you thought they were, that your past together was not what you thought it was, your future is not what you thought it would be, your home that seems safe and predictable has collapsed into chaos, and so even though you haven't physically moved at all, you suddenly find yourself in a completely different place metaphysically. This is a very powerful idea that is expressed in many stories as the descent into the underworld or even hell itself. In a way, it is interesting that the story was able to pass on this lesson despite not being expressed in the story directly. Now, after all that, we are finally getting to the climax of the movie, and this is where the meaning of Frozen will finally reveal itself. The dramatic scene is set up like this. Elsa is heartbroken because Hans just told her that Anna is dead and he is about to strike her down with his sword in her moment of weakness. Anna sees Kristoff in the distance and has every reason to believe that her life will be saved if they kiss each other. But then she sees Elsa about to be killed by Hans. She now has a choice to make. Go to Kristoff and save herself, or go help her sister and freeze to death. And she chooses the latter. And no wonder, because remember, to Anna, Elsa is the most important thing at the top of her hierarchy of values, the blue star at the peak of the mountain. Letting her sister die would mean sacrificing her highest ideal and betraying her own values. Sure, she would be alive, but what kind of life would that be, carrying that kind of burden on her conscience? And so she decides that Elsa is more important to her than her own life and sacrifices herself in order to protect that which is the most valuable to her. She throws herself in front of Elsa, and just as she is about to be hit by the sword, she turns to ice and the sword shatters, rendering Hans harmless. And so Anna dies, making the most meaningful sacrifice possible. And here's the thing about sacrifices, as far as stories are concerned. The more meaningful and proper the sacrifice, the more it is oriented towards the highest of values, the more it pays off, and the ultimate sacrifice yields the ultimate reward. Which in Anna's case means that this sacrifice ends up being the act of true love that melts her frozen heart, and she turns back from ice into a person of flesh and blood. So she saves her life, finds true love, prevents Hans from taking over the kingdom, saves her sister, and makes her realize the key to controlling her powers. So now she can assume her proper place as the rightful ruler of the land, and the catastrophic winter ends and prosperity returns. And if you've been paying attention, you might have noticed a familiar pattern: betrayal, sacrifice, and rebirth. Just like Harry Potter, who is brought down into deep underground, betrayed by a fragment of Voldemort's soul, mortally wounded by a giant serpent, and brought back to life by a phoenix, a bird who symbolizes the essence of sacrificing yourself so that you might be reborn anew. And I'm sure that if you think about it, you can come up with one or two other similar stories. So, that I think is the true meaning of Frozen. Now, what's interesting about that is that this meaning transcends the notions of gender or sexuality. Just try and imagine randomly changing the genders of any characters in the movie, and you will notice that what changes is just the superficial nuance. It doesn't matter if it's Anna or Anton, Elsa or Alice, Kristoff or Christine, Hans or Hansine. The core meaning remains the same, that of the importance of proper sacrifices. So then, where does this notion that the movie is about women not needing men come from? It didn't start with Dr. Jordan Peterson, that's for sure. I suspect it sort of snowballed from the early creative choices by Disney executives who wanted to have a movie they could present as being in line with the growing prevalence of female empowerment movements to earn some virtue points. Then from critics who picked up on it, hyper focused on that one aspect of the movie, and praised it to high heavens. And that, of course, provoked a reaction from the conservatives, damning the movie for eroding traditional values. To me, this just highlights one important aspect of stories. No story exists by itself, and there is always a storyteller who tells it and explains it. The storyteller gets to decide which parts of the story to emphasize and which parts to gloss over. The storyteller gets to decide which stories they tell and when. And when the meaning of the story is not clear, because it is challenging to put some ideas into words and they get buried in abstraction, then the storyteller gets to be the authority on explaining the story to those who seek the meaning behind those words. This gives the storyteller a degree of power over those who listen to them, power they can use to further their own personal agendas, and we can see in history how it can play out, from the ancient priest kings to various religious organizations and wars waged in their names. But the storyteller doesn't even need to be another person. You yourself are your own storyteller. For starters, you are telling yourself stories about your own life in the way you are rationalizing the choices you make. And secondly, every story you encounter, you end up essentially retelling to yourself, picking and choosing which parts of the story you take to heart and what meaning you extract out of them. And that brings us to the conclusion of this presentation. It now falls to you to decide if all of this was just wishful thinking and confirmation bias on my part, or if my interpretations of the events depicted in the movie hold actual merit. Thank you for listening. Over and out.